Horror on Gold Coast. Couple mauled by aggressive mastiff during evening dog walk. Both undergo surgery. A peaceful evening walk turned into a nightmare for a Gold Coast couple after they were viciously attacked by an aggressive mastiff that chased them down a suburban street, leaving both with serious injuries, requiring surgery. Now let's go beyond the surface and reveal every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
What happens when the very thing you brought into your neighborhood to keep your family safe actually becomes the ultimate danger to everyone else?
It's a terrifying thought, honestly.
It really is. I mean, picture this. You are stepping out of your front door. It is a Thursday, just shortly before 6 p.m.
Right, the sun is just starting to go down.
Yeah, exactly. It's casting those long, familiar shadows across the lawns on your street. You have your partner by your side, your pet dog on a leash, and you are just settling into that, comfortable, mindless rhythm of an evening stroll.
It's the kind of idyllic suburban routine that you don't even really think about. You expect to maybe wave to a neighbor, check out a new garden down the street, and just head home.
Totally. But then, in the span of literally just a few terrifying seconds, that quiet suburban reality is completely shattered.
It's a profound disruption. I mean, we rely so heavily on the predictability of our environment.
Oh, for sure. We take it for granted.
We do. And when that baseline assumption of safety is violently broken, the psychological shock can actually be almost as severe as the physical one.
And that shock is exactly what we are going to explore today. We are looking at a stack of sources, primarily excerpts from a piece titled Shadows of Arundel, the Gold Coast Mastiff Maulings.
It is a really intense set of documents.
Yeah, it is. Our mission for this deep dive is to reconstruct the anatomy of a truly shocking incident. We're going to unpack not just the brutal mechanics of the attack itself, but the incredible sociological response of the bystanders.
The people who literally ran toward the danger.
Right. And finally, we will examine the broader systemic implications this has for civic infrastructure and the heavy, often misunderstood legal responsibilities of pet ownership. So, okay, let's unpack this.
It really is a fascinating collision of elements. I mean, you have an animal management failure on one hand, but you also have this real-time study in human psychology.
Like community dynamics in action.
Exactly. It tests the fragile nature of the social contract we all implicitly sign when we, move into a neighborhood.
Let's start by establishing the facts of the event, because the timeline is just harrowing. We're talking about a husband in his 50s and his wife in her 40s.
Just a normal couple.
Just a normal couple. It is that Thursday evening we just imagine. They are in the suburb of Arundel, walking their pet dog, and out of nowhere, an aggressive mastiff charges at them.
And it doesn't just snap and retreat, which is what a lot of dogs might do.
Right, it actively chases them down the street, it hunts them. The text says it was a sustained, repetitive attack.
Which is key here, that repetitive nature.
Now, I am trying to put myself in their shoes, and I keep thinking about how the human brain even processes that. It is like when you are walking down the stairs and you miss a step.
Oh yeah, that stomach drop feeling.
Exactly. Your stomach drops because your physical reality suddenly doesn't match your mental map. How does the brain even begin to process a sudden, primal threat in an environment like a suburban sidewalk that you inherently trust?
That misstep analogy is actually perfect. But you have to, magnify that feeling by 1,000. What you were describing is a massive spike in cognitive dissonance.
Okay, cognitive dissonance. Break that down for me.
Well, in a high-stress, sudden-onset event like this, the brain goes through a decision-making cycle. It's often called the OD loop.
The OD loop. Wait, what does that stand for?
It stands for observe, orient, decide, and act.
Oh, okay. Observe, orient, decide, act.
Right. So in a familiar environment, like your own street, your brain expects an observe of a neighbor walking and an orient of being safe.
Makes sense.
But when a mastiff suddenly charges, your observe phase registers a lethal threat, but your orient phase is still kind of stuck on safe suburban street.
So your brain essentially just jams up.
Exactly. The brain stutters. It has to completely rewrite its understanding of reality before it can even decide how to act.
Wow.
That delay, even if it is a fraction of a second, is what makes sudden attacks so devastating. And what's fascinating here is how the specific reality of this attack was documented.
You mean the evidence they gathered?
Yeah. The most visceral evidence captured wasn't visual observation. It was actually the audio.
You are talking about the CCTV footage from the nearby home mentioned in the sources?
Precisely. The source material highlights this disturbing CCTV footage, but it explicitly emphasizes the sound.
Right, because it wasn't just visual.
No, it was loud, echoing, guttural barking tearing through the quiet neighborhood, followed immediately by desperate screams for help.
It's chilling to even think about.
It is, and you have to think about the acoustic architecture of a typical suburban street. The paved roads, the brick houses, the hard wooden fences.
They sort of box the sound in.
They all act as an amphitheater. They literally trap and amplify high-frequency sounds, like human screams.
It strips away the civilized veneer of the neighborhood entirely. Hearing those desperate screams over the barks of a massive dog really paints a picture of chaos that, well, video alone sometimes fails to convey.
Because the audio forces you to imagine the panic.
Exactly. And a mauling is so mechanically different from a standard dog bite, isn't it? The text is very clear that the dog repeatedly lunged and bit as they struggled to defend themselves.
It is vastly different. A bite is often a single reactive action. An animal gets spooked, it snaps, and it backs away.
Like a warning shot.
Right. A mauling, however, is a continuous, aggressive onslaught. It requires the victims to endure a prolonged state of physical combat.
Against an animal bred for size and strength.
Exactly. The Mastiff is a powerful, heavy breed designed to hold its ground. Escaping that kind of sustained attack requires an immense output of physical energy.
Which has to be exhausting.
It is. It plunges the victims into deep physiological shock very quickly.
Which brings us to the most incredible part of this timeline. Because those echoing screams trapped in that suburban amphitheater didn't just, fade out. They triggered a massive human reaction.
The neighborhood response.
Yeah, and wait, I'm actually struggling to understand something here. We always hear about the bystander effect.
Oh, sure, the psychological phenomena.
Right, this well-documented idea where in an emergency, people just freeze. They assume someone else will call 911, or they pull out their phones to record, or they just lock their doors.
This happens all the time.
So why didn't that happen in Arundel? The sources say nearby residents literally rushed out of their homes. Multiple neighbors ran toward an actively mauling Mastiff to scare it away. Why did they break the bystander effect?
It is a brilliant question. The bystander effect typically thrives on one crucial element, and that is ambiguity.
Ambiguity, like not knowing what's going on.
Exactly. If you look out your window and see two people arguing intensely, your brain looks for a reason not to get involved. You think, maybe they know each other. Maybe it is a marital dispute. I shouldn't intervene.
So you talk yourself out of it.
Right. Ambiguity diffuses responsibility. But the acoustic trauma of mauling those visceral, terrifying screams of pure panic, it shatters all ambiguity. There is no maybe anymore.
I see. So the brain instantly registers that this is not a misunderstanding. This is a life or death crisis.
Exactly. When the ambiguity is removed, the psychological dynamic flips from the bystander effect to what we can call a village mentality.
A village mentality. I like that phrase.
The shared illusion of safety has been broken, and the community instinctively acts to neutralize the threat and restore order.
So they just swarmed the threat.
Yes. By stepping into that chaotic environment, the neighbors introduced new variables. Shouting, sudden movements, multiple targets. It overwhelmed the Mastiff's focus and successfully scared it off. They literally ended the active threat.
And the moment that threat is neutralized, the audio captures another vital piece of evidence. One witness is heard urgently shouting over the chaos, "We need an ambulance!"
It's such a powerful moment in the recording.
It is. Amidst bleeding victims, panicking neighbors, and a massive dog that has just been chased off, someone has the profound clarity to shout for medical help.
That specific shout is a critical pivot point in the timeline. That vocalization marks the exact millisecond. The situation transitioned from an active, violent combat scenario into a critical medical emergency.
Like a switch flipping in the brain.
It is the sound of cognitive order trying to reassert itself. The collective focus of the neighborhood shifted instantly from neutralizing a threat to triaging the victims.
And that triage was desperately needed because the transition from the street to the hospital is grim. The medical toll described in these sources is just devastating.
It really highlights the severity of the attack.
Emergency services rushed the couple to Gold Coast University Hospital for emergency surgery. The husband suffered deep lacerations and puncture wounds to his arm.
Which is common in these types of attacks.
Yeah. The wife sustained multiple injuries to her arms and hands while trying to protect herself. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, lay it on me.
Amidst this horrifying, brutal attack that leaves two adults needing major emergency surgery, family members confirm that the couple's own pet dog, the one they were walking, escaped the entire ordeal totally unharmed. Not a single scratch.
It is a staggering detail. and it speaks volumes about the mechanical reality of the attack and human instinct.
How so?
If we look closely at the wife's injuries, multiple wounds specifically to her arms and hands, the text notes, these were sustained defensively.
Right, trying to block the bites.
Exactly. When you factor in the unharmed pet dog, the implication is incredibly powerful.
Right, because my first thought is, doesn't basic biological self-preservation kick in? Why take the brunt of a Mastiff's bite? Why not drop the leash and run?
Because human instinct is complex. Yes, self-preservation is a primary drive. But there is also a phenomenon related to kin selection and the protection of dependents.
So treating the dog like a family member to be protected.
Precisely. In an aggressive dog attack, the attacking animal will almost always target the other animal first. It is a territorial or predatory instinct.
That makes sense, yeah.
For the couple's pet to escape completely unharmed while both adults sustain deep puncture wounds, it strongly indicates that the couple actively inserted themselves between the Mastiff and their dog.
Wow, they literally blocked the attack.
They essentially use their own bodies as physical shields. The instinct to protect a vulnerable dependent completely overrode their own physical self-preservation.
That is absolutely heartbreaking, but undeniably heroic. And we really need to emphasize the severity of the damage they took to provide that shield.
The physical toll was massive.
The text specifically mentions deep lacerations and puncture wounds requiring emergency surgery. Why is a dog bite, or in this case a mauling, considered such a severe surgical emergency?
Because of the anatomy of the animal's jaws. A Mastiff's bite is not a clean cut like a knife.
Right, it's not a surgical slice.
Not at all. Canine teeth are designed to griff, puncture, and tear. A deep puncture wound drives whatever anaerobic bacteria is in the dog's mouth deep into human tissue.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It is. It goes far below the skin where oxygen can't reach it. That creates a massive immediate risk of severe infection.
So it's not just the physical damage, it's the biological threat.
Exactly. Furthermore, the tearing motion causes tissue avulsion. That means muscles, tendons, and nerves are ripped or crushed.
That explains the need for emergency surgery.
Yeah, emergency surgery isn't just about stitching the skin closed. It is often about exploring the wound to repair structural damage to the limb and meticulously cleaning it to prevent life-threatening infections.
So while the victims are in the operating room physically being put back together, the narrative inevitably shifts to the question of accountability.
As it always does in these situations.
Because when a hazard of this magnitude is loose on the street, someone has to answer for it. The sources outline a very swift response from the authorities. Gold Coast Council officers respond immediately, they seize the Mastiff, and they launch an investigation.
Which is standard procedure for a severe attack.
But then the sources mention this detail that really gave me pause. The text says that the next day, officers returned to the owner's property to deliver an official notice.
Okay, yeah.
And it notes that warning signs indicating the presence of a guard dog were placed on the front fence. Now, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
If I am the dog's owner, and I have a guard dog sign proudly displayed on my fence, doesn't that legally shield me? Isn't that essentially a proceed at your own risk warning to the public?
That's a very common misconception.
I am telling you the dog is dangerous, so if something happens, haven't I covered my bases?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of legal liability, it is actually the exact opposite. Placing a guard dog sign does not act as a legal waiver that absolves you of responsibility. It acts as an admission.
Wait, an admission of what?
An admission that you are knowingly harboring a dangerous hazard. In legal and civic terms, it often shifts the framework from basic negligence to strict liability.
Strict liability. Okay, give me an example of that.
Think of it like keeping a highly toxic chemical in your garage. If you put a sign on your garage door that says danger, toxic chemical, and then that chemical leaks out into the public street and burns someone, the sign doesn't protect you.
Right, because you brought the hazard there in the first place.
Exactly. The sign proves that you knew the chemical was dangerous, which means your burden of containment was astronomically higher than if you just had standard household cleaners.
That is a brilliant analogy. The sign is proof of known risk.
Exactly. A designated guard dog implies the animal is specifically kept and perhaps trained for its aggressive capabilities. It's meant to intimidate or neutralize intruders.
Right.
Therefore, the owner's responsibility to ensure that animal never breaches its perimeter is absolute.
So, what does this all mean for the council's investigation? How do they approach a case like this now that the animal is seized and the notice is served?
The investigation will forensically examine the perimeter breach. They have to pinpoint exactly how the containment failed.
Like looking for a broken fence.
Exactly. Was it a mechanical failure, like a latch that was rusted through, a fence that was inadequately low, or a gate that lacked a proper locking mechanism?
Or could it be human error?
Precisely. Was it a human failure? Did someone carelessly leave the front door wide open? The fact that the council seized the dog immediately and returned the very next day with an official notice indicates they're rapidly escalating their enforcement process.
They are messing around.
No, they are assessing breaches of animal management regulations, which exist entirely to ensure that private hazards do not become public threats.
And when those private hazards do become public threats, the damage goes far beyond the physical injuries of the victims.
The psychological ripple effect is huge.
It really is. A perimeter breach doesn't just stay on the pavement. It infects the minds of everyone living in that area. Which brings us to the community fallout.
It changes how people view their own homes.
You have this quiet suburb of Arundel, a place where people clearly feel safe enough to take evening strolls, and suddenly the illusion is completely shattered.
The sources mention the community reaction, right?
Yes, the sources state that this shocking attack has raised fresh concerns about public safety and responsible pet ownership, with many residents now actively calling for stricter enforcement to prevent similar incidents.
This raises an important question about the social contract we enter into when we live in a civilized suburb.
The unspoken rules of being a neighbor.
Exactly. A neighborhood is basically an agreement that we all surrender a little bit of absolute freedom in exchange for collective security.
Oh, that's an interesting way to frame it.
There's an inherent daily tension between individual property rights, like your right to own a pet or even a guard dog, and the collective right of the public to walk down the street without fear of being mauled.
Right, because if I can't walk my own dog on my own street without carrying a weapon or looking over my shoulder, then the social contract has fundamentally failed.
Precisely. And when an individual's pet ownership practices fail so spectacularly that they endanger the public, the community's natural reaction is a demand for systemic change.
They want new rules.
Well, this call for stricter enforcement isn't just about anger. It is actually a psychological coping mechanism. It is a way for the neighborhood to regain a sense of control over their environment.
They're essentially asking the civic authorities to rebuild the invisible boundaries that failed. They want proactive, preventative action.
Because reacting after the fact isn't comforting.
Right. A reactive response, like just seizing the dog after two people are already in emergency surgery, isn't enough to make anyone feel safe walking past that house again. They want to know that regulations aren't just polite suggestions, but actionable laws with severe consequences.
Because without strict civic enforcement, the trust that holds a community together just dissolves. It forces every single resident to continuously reevaluate their surroundings for lethal threats.
Which is exhausting.
Completely exhausting and antithetical to the concept of a neighborhood. The phrase responsible pet ownership has to mean more than just feeding your dog. It is a critical, non-negotiable component of public security.
It absolutely is. So to bring all of these threads together, we have journeyed through an incredibly complex and harrowing event today. We started with the jarring reality of a couple being pursued and brutally mauled by a Mastiff in the middle of a quiet Arundel street.
And we explored how the brain struggles to process such sudden cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, that ODA loop concept was fascinating. We unpacked the chilling acoustic reality of the CCTV footage and analyzed how those very screams broke the ambiguity of the bystander effect.
Triggering that life-saving village mentality among the neighbors.
Right. We examined the severe medical mechanics of puncture wounds and tissue damage, marveling at the primal protective instincts that resulted in the couple's own pet dog escaping completely unharmed.
A true silver lining in a dark story.
Definitely. And finally, we looked at the swift enforcement action of the Gold Coast Council, exploring the legal concept of strict liability and the community's desperate demand to restore their fractured social contract.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, drawn directly from the most paradoxical detail of the council's investigation.
Oh, the guard dog sign.
Yes. Think about the chilling irony of that guard dog sign placed on the front fence. The fundamental purpose of a guard dog is to provide security. It is acquired, housed, and kept to ensure that a specific property and the people inside it remain safe from unpredictable outside threats.
To keep the danger out.
Exactly. But this incident in Arundel proves that when the physical boundaries of that property fail, the dynamic completely inverts. The very animal meant to keep one home safe escapes its perimeter and becomes the ultimate unpredictable threat to the safety of the entire neighborhood.
That is a haunting thought to leave on. The protector becoming the predator the second the perimeter fails. It really makes you look differently at those warning signs on the fences during your next evening stroll. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpacked the anatomy and the aftermath of this deeply unsettling event. Stay curious, keep asking questions about the systems that govern the world around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Okay, one question for you. Should owners of aggressive dogs face stricter legal consequences when their pets seriously injure innocent people? Or are such attacks sometimes unavoidable despite responsible ownership? Share your thoughts. Don't forget to comment it.